Awesome. Thanks, Kira. And hello, enterprise techies. To all of our suits and hoodies, welcome to our March New York Enterprise Tech Meetup. We got some ham horn for y'all. So for those of you who are wondering, where is John Lair? Don't worry, he is currently in our Zoom green room getting set up for his fireside chat shortly. So we will be stepping into his big enterprise shoes today. I'm Jessica Lynn and my teammate Kelly Mack. And we've joked that we're going to turn this into the New York MBA Top Shot meetup behind John's back. So if anybody wants a pool for the next drop, hit us up for that. We may or may not be a little bit addicted to Top Shot. But don't worry, because those of you who have also been with us for a meetup for over 9 years now, you know that we live and breathe enterprise tech all day, every day here as investors at Workbench, an enterprise software VC fund here in New York. We invest in early stage enterprise startups throughout the country in $3 to $6 million rounds, and we are obsessed with all things enterprise sales and go-to-market, which is why we are also so stoked for our terrific New York Enterprise Tech meetup lineup for you today. First up, we have a demo from AppLand, a Workbench portfolio company coming out of stealth today to demo their interactive code analysis platform. And then we've got a terrific fireside chat with Jeff Lawson, co-founder and CEO of Twilio, as he talks about his new book, Ask Your Developer, How to Harness the Power of Software Developers and Win in the 21st Century, and how he has led Twilio to over $60 billion in market cap.
And before we begin, a few reminders for the tweeters in the room. Our hashtag is NYETM, so be sure to tweet away and tweet often. And you can view all of our videos from past meetups on the Workbench YouTube page, including today's session. So be sure to subscribe and smash that like button. And we'll leave time for audience Q&A, so throw any questions you have into the chat. And so with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Lawler, CEO and co-founder of AppLand. Before AppLand, Elizabeth co-founded the company Conjure, which was an early pioneer in secrets management and DevOps security, which CyberArk bought in 2017. Now with AppLand, Elizabeth and her team are helping engineering teams find the effects and side effects of code changes before they ship with interactive code analysis. When not building AppLand, Elizabeth and Kevin are busy building and driving planes and rally cars. And so I'll leave it with Elizabeth to take it away.
Thanks for the introduction, Kelly. And I'm really delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having us. For almost a decade, as Kelly mentioned, I've built companies that support developers because I believe developers are the engine of innovation and growth for business. At AppLand, we're empowering developers to deliver new features and functionality faster without sacrificing security or quality. We help developers see, understand, and improve the design of the software they create and work with, no matter how large or complex those systems may be. And I'm excited to introduce our new free and open source product, AppMap. AppMap is an interactive code analysis tool that helps developers and their organizations meet their goals for maintainable, high quality software. So why is the product called AppMap? Well, today, thanks to the advancement of technology, people never take a trip without a Google Map. It's an interactive robotic assistant that guides us and allows us to explore our world more freely and confidently. Like Google Maps, AppMap drives the back roads of your application and records everything turn by turn, just like those Google camera cars. We call this technique interactive code analysis, and it helps you navigate your software projects of any size more confidently. Using AppMap frees up more of your mental energy to write good, clean code, and it helps your team deliver the best quality software. Using interactive code analysis, AppMap creates beautiful dependency maps, execution traces, and service and schema catalogs. It does this automatically right where you work, and the larger the code base, the better it works. The starting point for work on any new feature or bug fix is the dependency map. This is your big picture view. You can see all of the components that are relevant to what you're working on and how they're connected. Search and navigate through web services, code, libraries, external services, SQL, all in the context of a specific feature. Then get immediate visual feedback on how your code changes affect the big picture. AppMap has great support for SQL. High quality software has good performance, and slow queries can be a major contributor to bad performance. When developers can see queries right alongside the code, they can be optimized before they impact performance in production. And of course, because we're in a code editor, the source code is always available. Just click View Source to go right to the source line for any node in the diagram. Going beyond code discovery and navigation, AppMap has dedicated features for improving code quality. The first of these is labels. Labels enable us to identify the key functions in the source code and understand what the most critical code does. I'm showing you an open source e-commerce app that has over 23,000 commits in its history. Labels help us find and review key aspects of this code's design, even though it's a large application. So far, we've seen how AppMaps records the current state or how my application is. But just like Google Maps, AppMaps have a central service that's constantly learning. That central service is called AppLand. AppLand is a hosted service that collects, aggregates, and analyzes AppMaps to get even deeper insights into your code's architecture. It even records a history of how your software's design has evolved across releases by looking back and following the code forward in time. It's been battle tested on projects with up to 1 million lines of code each. Let's step through an example of how AppLand makes AppMaps even more powerful. As I mentioned before, interactive code analysis can help you identify security, performance, maintainability, and logic errors that lead to functional problems. Earlier this week, GitHub disclosed a security vulnerability related to the authentication of users. GitHub deeply knows code and has an elite team of engineers. If it can happen to them, it can happen to anyone. Changing authentication and authorization code within an app is high risk because mistakes can lead to data breaches, security disclosures, and reputational damage. So suppose I'm changing a feature in this e-commerce application. Here's my code editor with a change in progress, and I'm working with code that creates a new user. I've noticed that the assignment of roles and permissions to the user happens twice. As a developer, this immediately catches my attention. It runs counter to a software best practice called don't repeat yourself, or dry. In this case, there shouldn't be two functions in the code that both assign the user's permissions I'm working with. I think I know what to do. I make my change and I run the test. You can see from the source code diff that one line has been removed, but you can't see from the source code what the change actually does. In AppMap mode in my code editor, I can compare my local AppMaps to the latest production version stored in the central AppLand server. I can see what's been added, removed, or changed in the actual code behavior. In this case, my code has introduced an important difference in design. A necessary SQL delete statement has been removed. My improvement has actually caused a nasty and unexpected side effect. If you examine this issue, my change allows an unauthorized user to execute a privilege escalation attack. Low-level admins can now make themselves super admins of the entire site or even ransom it. My AppMap is the earliest warning for this issue in the development process. So obviously I need to revert to the approved design before I check in my code. This behavior flaw would not have been evident from my test cases, from static analysis, from profilers, or performance monitors. Fortunately, no one works alone. For teams, AppMaps are automatically generated with any code execution, test case, or CI/CD run, and are automatically versioned and stored in AppLand. That means a code reviewer can see the same information stored in AppLand that I see in my editor. So even if I didn't catch this flaw, someone else can spot the problem and send my code back to be fixed, because AppMaps make the problem evident. But also because AppLand has an API, we can use the data to create automatic scanning scripts that perform the same function as the code reviewer. AppLand scans look for good design patterns that we want and flag bad patterns that we need extra review before merging. If necessary, AppLand can even block the release. We'll be hosting an interactive event for developers on scanning for design flaws, so follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn for details. To recap, with AppLand's central platform, development teams now have 3 chances to catch changes that might have a significant adverse effect. First, in the local development environment, with diagrams and tools that make issues prominent. Second, during code review, by sharing and reviewing AppMaps as part of the pull request review process. And third, in CI/CD, where risky, unapproved, or unexpected changes can be configured to break the build. The overall result is a better understanding of software design, smooth and powerful collaboration, and intelligent tooling to help developers improve quality while delivering faster. And that leads to happy customers for the business. AppMap is free, open source, and available now for Ruby, Java, and Python. AppLand, the central service, is in beta, and access is available upon request. So check out AppMap in the VS Code Marketplace today. To learn more about our roadmap, upcoming language support, including JavaScript, .NET, and PHP, please join our community on Discord. To find the link for our educational events or to schedule a demo, go to appland.com. Thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that awesome demo. We have a great question in chat. I'll read it out loud to you. And then if there's other questions, please send them along. So this question's from Alex. How does AppMap integrate with or promote better code documentation to put code in the context of target, objective, or functionality?
So that's a really great question. So as I mentioned in the demo, you can actually embed links to AppMaps as part of your pull request or GitHub commit so that it provides an interactive visual documentation of the code that you're committing.
Any other questions from the audience? I'll ask one. So what languages do you support? I think you mentioned it briefly, but.
Yes. So Ruby, Java, and Python are currently in GA, and we have ongoing work with our open source projects in .NET, JavaScript, and PHP. Do we have plans to support C#? Yes, we do. We're also working on upcoming integrations for code editors and interactive development environments for other products that are not just VS Code.
I'll ask one more. What are you most excited for on the roadmap, Elizabeth?
Oh, well, you know, I think that the community aspects of building out more languages and more integrations is a very exciting prospect for us. I think that you know, having an open source first approach and having a strong community mentality that helps to drive this roadmap, I think that's really what's most exciting for me, is to see what the community is coming up with and where they want to help us take this project.
Cool. We've got a few more questions that just came in. Do you want to take a look, Elizabeth?
What tools does this replace? So, you know, typically many of these types of diagrams or flowcharts are often created on whiteboards in products like UML diagramming tools, etc. This is because this is an automated tool, the diagrams itself are part of that. In terms of replacement for other tools, you know, we really believe that this is going to be a new category of interactive code analysis, which is to say that there exist static code analyzers that will identify certain types of code flaws, but they do not typically analyze behavior flaws. And these types of architectural flaws are pernicious, they're tricky, they're often only identified by experienced reviewers. And we think that this is a new capability that we're bringing to market. Whoa, there's many questions about Rabbit. I'm scrolling. Integration to the CI/CD pipeline. Yes, so this product works very well if you use Jenkins, Travis, Circle CI. It integrates with GitHub. And you know what? I should also introduce the other person who's on the call, in case you want to jump in, is our CTO, Kevin Gilpin.
Hi, yep, I'm just putting some answers in the box while you're talking so we can get as many answers in as we can.
Yeah, so I think, Elizabeth, if you want to just end off, I know one of the questions was how do I join the open source community? And then if you and Kevin don't mind putting your contact details in the chat, and Kevin, feel free to keep answering the Q&A in chat, and we'll move over to the fireside chat if that works for you guys.
Yes, that would be great. So we'll put our contact information in the box. If you'd like to join our community, we have obviously we're on GitHub, and we have a Discord that people can come learn about all of the projects that we've spoken about today, both the improvements that we make to ongoing language support and to new languages that we'll be supporting in the future. And we really look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Kevin. Huge round of applause. And with that, without further ado, we are so thrilled to welcome Jonathan Lair and Jeff Lawson, co-founder and CEO of Twilio.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jess. And Elizabeth, Kevin, that's great stuff. I am so thrilled to welcome Jeff Lawson, co-founder and CEO of Twilio, to today's New York Enterprise Tech Meetup. His book, Ask Your Developer, is like the Six Sigma playbook for what he calls the new software supply chain. Jeff, thank you again for being here. In true Workbench form, we always like to start off with an icebreaker. So my opening question to you is going to be, what is the coolest or most creative Twilio use case that you've ever seen?
Thanks. Great question, John. And it's great to be here. You know, I think my favorite thing that's ever been built, there's been so many wacky, wild things have been built with Twilio, but one of them that I call the Internet of Bears. So we got wind of this project that some researchers had built. Their job, they were like university researchers, and they were tracking the migratory habits of bears. And apparently, if that's your job, what you do is like you get in a helicopter and you like spot bears and you land your helicopter and you go shoot them with a tranquilizer. And then you like climb on the bear and you hope it's actually tranquilized and you like put a little data collector on its like collar. And then like a year later, you go find that bear again from your helicopter, you land, you tranquilize it again, and you take the data card off and put a new one in. And you can imagine this is really traumatic for the bear, for the researchers, for everybody. And so they got this idea that like, oh, if I put a SIM card and a cellular modem in this collar, that the bear could collect data. And then whenever the bear happened to wander into an area that had connectivity, it would just start texting the data off the card to an app they built on Twilio to like collect all this data. And you're like, I can't believe that people do this for a job. I can't believe the bears put up with it. I can't believe that they built this on Twilio. So the Internet of Bears, it's gotta be one of my favorite stories ever.
That is amazing. And my challenge for all of you NYETM attendees today is try to come up with a cooler use case so that Jeff references it at a future talk.
and has as good a name as the Internet of
Bears. Kudos to that. So for audience benefit, the things we're going to cover today include some lessons around developer first culture, around customer centricity, go to market, and more. Please put questions in the chat while we're talking because we'll make sure to get to many of those at the end. So Jeff, let's dig right in. One of my favorite chapters in your book was called Wearing the Customer Shoes. And you kick it off by asking why every company claims to be customer centric, customer focused, and few really do feel focused on and centric, as you wrote in the text. Can you elaborate on that a bit? Because you point out how NPS is point in time, surveys don't really talk about really the organizational health. So yeah, we'd love to just get more perspective on that to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, like what organization doesn't want to feel like they're customer centric? Yet, how many companies that we deal with in our lives do we really feel like they're doing a good job for us, right? It's actually kind of rare. And the reason I think is because, you know, leaders say they want their companies to be customer centric, but you really got to put a bunch of meat on the bone for what that means. And in particular, you need to build mechanisms into the company to actually make that become true. Because without intentionally building mechanisms to keep people focused on the customer, then there's all sorts of organizational dynamics that take over. And the organizational dynamics focus employees inward on the org chart, on their career paths, on the various executives who are approvers or deniers of plans. And those are all the things that essentially take the eye off the ball, which is the customer. And I don't really think that NPS and surveys and things like that are really the answer. Really, the answer is trying to clear the way of all of those distractions and creating proximity between the people who you want serving your customer and the very customers they're serving. And I always think back to the early days of Twilio, you know, when we were, say, a 5-person company. And at that moment in time, at any day, I might be writing code, designing a new product, doing customer support, on a sales call with a prospective customer, you know, raising money from investors and making a Costco run to get pretzels for the office. Yeah. Like any day would be filled with all of those things at once. And in that world, I could keep in my head the complete picture of what we're doing, why we're doing it, like what not just the customer need is, but actually really like into it, like reading between the lines, what does the customer really need? And actually build products that I think not just meet the need today, but actually my intuition for where the product's going to be in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And that is a magical point in time. And as you grow the company, the tendency is for you to hire specialists to do all of those things, right? You're going to hire a customer support team to go, be professionals and do customer support. You're going to hire a sales team to bring the profession of sales and do that. You're going to hire product managers to define products and things like that. And all of those roles, while necessary and really well-intentioned, they often frame what they're doing in terms of like, well, we're trying to protect the developers from like the distraction of customers.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, it's really well intentioned and like, yeah, developers do need to protect their time to be able to focus and things like that. But if you execute that to perfection, what have you done? You've taken the very people who are building your products and protected them from the people they're serving. That's not going to have a great outcome.
Yeah. And you have a line that I love that so aligns with the Workbench ethos, where you say that you walk around the office and you ask a developer, what are you working on? And if they say a feature, you're like, okay, but what customer problem does that solve? And related to what you're saying about keeping them at the front lines, how does that work as you've scaled Twilio versus being the 5-person company?
Well, look, one of the biggest things one of the biggest points that I make in my book is that business people, whether that's executives, product managers, et cetera, our job is to think of developers as a creative class of worker, and not just people are going to grind out code, but actually creative problem solvers. And when you think of developers that way, what you need to do is not share solutions with them. Hey, go build this. Here's a spec. Go build this to the spec. Instead, share problems with them. What are the biggest customer problems or business problems that you're trying to solve? Share the problem and make your technical teams part of coming up with the answer to those problems. And when you do that, you get a whole other level of output, quality, and speed from your technical teams, because they're just operating at a different level. They understand the customer and the problem they're trying to solve, and they want to learn more and they want to come up with new ways of solving it. But if you hand them a solution, you're basically just saying, look, don't really think, just build this thing. You get a very different outcome. And so sharing problems, not solutions, is the key. And so when I walk around, back when we walked around offices, and I talked to developers, the thing I would often ask, what you working on? And they'd say, oh, I'm building this thing. And I'd say, well, what customer problem does it solve? And oftentimes they'd say, well, what we've learned from customers is they really have this problem and this, they're trying to solve this and that. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's really fascinating. And then every once in a while, I hear a developer, they say, well, I don't know. I just was told to build this. And, that's a mental note that team is probably not using this share problems, not solutions methodology. And, maybe we're following up with the leadership of that team to understand why.
I love that customer empathy and centricity as a guiding light. And, that's core to our DNA at Workbench. Let me ask you then almost the opposite question, thinking back to when you were a 5-person company. And again, in this Enterprise Tech Meetup audience, a lot of our attendees are early stage founders. How do you protect yourself from the other side, which is almost being pulled and having your roadmap taken over by a customer? There is almost a delicate balance there. Do you have any tips for the early stage companies? Yeah,
well, one of our values is wear the customer's shoes. That's where that phrase comes from. And it comes from the old idea that if you want to understand someone, you walk a mile in their shoes. And the interesting thing is where the apostrophe goes. So if you wear the customer's shoes, apostrophe S, that can be interpreted as like, do whatever it takes for one customer. And while there's a certain value to that notion, like, do you want to go the distance for a customer? Do you really want to treat them well? Especially in enterprise business, because enterprise is a lot more about focusing and giving a high degree of service and attention to a smaller number of customers who are going to pay you more. But the apostrophe for where the customer shoes comes after the S.
I like that a lot.
Collective customer's shoes. And in that, there's a trade-off. When you do something for one customer, because of the finite nature of time, you are most likely doing something that is, or you're foregoing things you could be doing for a great many other customers. And so therein lies the wisdom of understanding, I'm hearing things from these customers. How do I abstract that into something that is broadly applicable to the market? And that's where really good decision-making comes into play and prioritization comes into play. Because you can maybe underserve one customer, but if you serve the market better because of the decision you make, the outcome for you is better. The outcome for customers in aggregate is probably better. And I often advise people at Twilio, like when I see them making a decision, like, oh well, we have to really do this one thing for this one customer. And I'm like, well, how supportable is that? Like let's say you're going to write some code for one customer. How supportable is that going to be? how much technical debt is that creating? Or how much is it taking away from like the roadmap for the rest of our customers? And I asked them like, is that really serving our customers to do that? Or is this going to be a decision that a year from now we're going to regret? Oh, why did we go off and like do this thing for one customer? Do you think in the fullness of time, you will feel like you're wearing customer shoes with this decision? And sometimes the answer is yes. Okay, fantastic, great. Sometimes the answer is no, not really. And so I think that's the question you have to ask yourself and actually roll the clock forward. It may feel good today to bend over backwards for one customer, but is that going to create technical debt or roadmap debt that ultimately you would say, oh, I didn't actually serve my customers well with that decision?
Yep, I love that framework. And kind of playing off then as a segue, as you've scaled, you have this notion of the dozen bagel team and keeping teams small so that they can be focused, but also be customer centric. What are a couple challenges and what's been unlocked by doing that in Twilio's growth where they can be all customer centric, but obviously the collaboration side, which you talked about, is critical as well between those teams?
Well, so I talked about the early days of Twilio, and we're a 5-person company or whatever, and how we're all able to stay really close to our customers and the mission and really have a very intrinsic drive because we just were really bought in and we just knew everything that was going on. And the goal as you grow your company, to me, is to continually try to recreate those conditions. And you might say, oh, that's not possible. But I share the story in the book of my friend Dave Chappelle, not the comedian Dave Chappelle, a different Dave Chappelle. Dave is the person who hired me at Amazon. And he joined Amazon when the company was about 100 people back in 1997. I joined Amazon in 2004, and I was one of the first product managers at Amazon Web Services. And Dave actually left the company right around that time, and the company was about 5,000 people in 2004 when I joined. Dave went and puttered around the world and traveled and stuff, and then he started a startup, and the startup actually later got acquired back into Amazon in about 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. And Amazon at that point was about 75,000 people. And that was right around the time when I was starting to grow Twilio and kind of asking a lot of questions about how we were going to grow the company and how we wanted to structure things. And I was like, this guy Dave has a really interesting perspective because he's seen Amazon, I think one of the world's most customer-centric companies, at 100 employees, at 5,000 employees, and now at 75,000 employees. And especially with that gap in the middle, you get perspective about how things have changed. And so I called up Dave one day and I said, Dave, I'm really curious. Can you compare and contrast those 3 companies for me? Amazon at 100, Amazon at 5,000, Amazon at 75,000. Thought about it for a second. Oh, no one's ever asked me that before. He thought about it and he said, you know what? It's exactly the same. The same bounce in people's step, the same urgency, the same intellect in the people that I work with every day. It's like that same 100-person company that I joined in 97. You just have no idea that there's 700 other floors full of these people littered all around the world. And I was blown away. I'm like, that's like a modern miracle, if you will. No other company that I can think of that has scaled as quickly and to the size that Amazon has, I think can claim that it still feels like a startup. And I know from friends who've worked at other big tech companies who've gone through that kind of growth. Oh, it got bureaucratic. Oh, it got slow. It's mostly about, the VPs fighting with each other. And it's like, that's pretty amazing. And the key to that is keeping it small. So continually trying to recreate the startup conditions. And at Twilio, the way we do that is by continually focus on building small customer-focused teams. And the small teams are defined by 3 things. First, a mission. Second, a customer. And third, metrics. So, first of all, let's talk about the customer, right? So you can have an internal customer or an external customer. But regardless of what you do in a company, you should know your customer. Like, who are you here to serve? Who are you here to make successful? Because everybody has a customer. And you have to define it, be explicit about who that is. The second thing is a mission. Okay, so what are you here to do for that customer? Let's align around that. And third, what are the metrics that tell us and you if you're succeeding in serving that mission for that customer? And once you align around those 3 things, a customer, a mission, and metrics, now that team is really free to go sprint for that customer. And you're not constantly second guessing decisions and having to run things up the chain and all this kind of stuff. And so I've always looked at creating small teams and creating the sense of autonomy by predefining the mission, the customer, and the metrics is really how you can set teams free to really focus on customers. And that is the essence of that startup entrepreneurial notion is we're just here to serve a customer. And and it's just us, like we're going to do it. Now you asked, what are the problems with that? There are problems with it. Number one, with a lot of small teams, you tend to get, you kind of want autonomy, but you also get redundancy. You get teams who are doing, say, redundant work. They're not perfectly aligned. It's not a top-down command and control environment where you say, we're all going to go take that hill and you move that piece of equipment and you march there. And that's the military analogy that's often used in business. And ours is quite different, to be honest. It's a little more chaotic and it's a little more, we got a lot of small teams serving missions for customers. Now it's up to us to make sure those missions collectively allow the company to achieve its goals and its mission. But the second thing is there is duplicated work and there is, everybody doesn't know what everybody's doing. And the thing is when people worry about that, and people often come to me and say, oh, don't you worry about all the duplicated work that's going on? I'm honestly not that worried about it. And here's why. I think about a world, let's take two extremes. One extreme is a company where you have lots of these small teams. They really operate almost like startups, like completely disconnected from each other, completely independent decision-making. And there's a lot of overlapping work, people reinventing things that other teams have already solved, all this kind of stuff. But every team feels really independent. They feel autonomous. If they meet their goals, they say, we did that. If they miss their goals, they say, bad on us, we failed. That's one world. In the other world, you've got a company that's completely command and control. No duplicated work. Everything is like perfectly aligned because you've got great command and control of the thing. And in that world, teams, there's no duplicated work. People feel very efficient, but when they say, well, we're here to get this done, but we are waiting for that team and that team and that team to do their part. And, those folks are running late and theirs ended up, not turning out the way we wanted it to. So therefore we couldn't get our job done. And that's just the way it is. You feel really disempowered. There's always an excuse, like a very legitimate excuse, you command and control structure. And you told us to wait for those people. And so we're waiting for those people and we can't do our job. In those two worlds, I would take the empowered startup-like environment any day of the week. Yeah, I would take any amount of like duplicative work and trade it for intrinsic drive and motivation, as opposed to the extrinsic world of like people just waiting around for their orders.
Yep, and that's actually the perfect segue in where we've covered a lot of the startup journey so far, but a lot of your book also touches on the Fortune 500 world of reinvention. So you have the concept of buy versus build, and in your book, you talk about build or die. So I'd love you to expand on that of what are some of those learnings for the big companies in our audience of how they can do that and kind of break the mold, because it's kind of funny. I read Does IT Matter by Nicholas Carr, like 15 years ago, where everything was almost commoditized in his view. And your book is almost like the rebuke of that, which is companies that do it right, that put their developers front and center, are going to be the ones that win.
Well, that's changed in 15 years.
Yeah.
It used to be, around the turn of the millennium, it was IT was largely about, making sure the printers had paper and, making sure the laptops worked and
plugging stuff in.
Financials software was running, in the back of the company. So IT back then, it was a cost center and it was the back of house. It was nothing customers ever saw or cared about. But along the way came all of our, mobile devices and web apps and all this kind of stuff. And it turns out that the interface that most companies now have with their customers is a digital one. Think about your bank. 20 years ago, you liked your bank if you walked in the door, they had a parking lot, maybe not in New York. And it was a freshly painted and the teller was friendly and they gave your kid a lollipop. You'd be like, oh, I really like my bank, right? Nowadays, you like your bank if the app works, if it's fast, if it doesn't crash, if it's got features that are making your life a little bit easier, like splitting the bill at dinner and things like that. Yeah. That's where you're like, oh, I really like my bank, right? So the value proposition has turned into a digital one. Now, back in the day of old IT, where it was a cost center, companies were often challenged with the question of we need a thing, right? Should we build it or should we buy it? And in that world, you look at it and well, it's not differentiating and, we're not very good at this stuff, but we should just buy something. And then any number of vendors would come in and sell you on the story that you should buy. And back then they were probably right. You should just buy those things. But now when it's your source of competitive differentiation, you can't just buy the same thing off the shelf that all your competitors have bought. How are you going to be differentiated? And what happens in like every market in every industry, along comes, usually it starts with some sort of startup, like a digital disruptor who's really good at building software. And what do? They listen to customers, because if they're going to edge their way into some market, they have to serve customers better. That's how they're going to do it. They listen to customers, they're developers, they start building features and functionality that solves customer problems in a way the status quo isn't. And they start winning the hearts, minds, and wallets of those customers. And eventually one of the incumbents wakes up and says, "Ooh, hey, you see this, they're taking our customers. We got to do the same thing." So the incumbent starts hiring developers, listening to customers, building a roadmap that answers customers' needs, right? And one by one, the participants in that market who intend to compete and win have to become builders, because they have to listen to customers and build a roadmap that's better than their competitors. It is literally a Darwinian evolution going on in every industry. And so that's why I say it's not about build versus buy anymore. It's about build versus die.
Can we flip that also? Because I totally agree
Die
with you on
versus build. You're right. That's
on the traditional, like the banking industry, like we're talking about. Have you seen almost the opposite go true in the tech world, where there's the stereotype people want to just build everything in-house? And let's take Twilio as an example. How do you make sure that you have incredibly capable developers, that they are focused on the external customer needs versus building another cool widget internally?
Well, here's the thing. If you believe the hypothesis that companies who win need to build to better serve their customers than the competition, then what you need to do is to buy the things that enable you to build. And that's where the software supply chain comes into play. So if you look at some of the fastest growing companies, I mean, not some of, like the fastest growing companies in the history of software, Amazon Web Services, Stripe, Twilio, right? We are all not selling apps. We're selling the building blocks. We are the supply chain of the entire digital revolution that's going on. And what you do is you buy the building blocks and the infrastructure that you need in order to accelerate your ability to build and to make it more likely that you're going to succeed at building. And one of the things I think is really fascinating about the last 20 years is it has never been easier to write software.
Yep.
Think about all the languages we have now, the frameworks we have now. Like, you can do amazing things with a few lines of code, but it has never been harder to operate software at internet scale. Totally, because the internet is now billions of people all around the world. And so serving those people with high uptime and low latency and security, I mean, these things are harder than ever, and they're getting harder every day. And that's why platforms, infrastructure that enable you to build confidently, globally, scalably, to really focus on the value creation you're doing for your customer is most critical of all.
I love that angle and perspective. And, that's fueling the next generation of developer-focused tooling and infra startups. So I heard an anecdote that at the time of your IPO, you only had, I think, something like 12 salespeople. If you did that journey all over again, do you continue that same go-to-market motion once again? Or for the early stage companies in the audience, do you recommend that they pair that bottoms-up developer motion with potentially some salespeople earlier?
Yeah, so we made the mistake. We should have had more salespeople earlier on in the life of the company. We have what we call the developer first go-to-market. And what that means is our relationship with almost every company we do business with, and we now have over 220,000 active customers. It starts with a developer, because a developer is bringing us in to solve some problem. And the developer, there's a problem they're trying to solve in the business. The developer says, "Oh, I think I can solve that." They pull up their Twilio account, they build a prototype. The prototype looks good. You roll it out to some customers. It becomes the alpha, and then the beta, and then the GA, and then it's rolled out everywhere. And it used to be that, we would reach out to customers, but oftentimes they'd say, "Yeah, it's okay. I'm a developer. I don't really want to talk to a salesperson. I'm good to go." And we would kind of accept that. I'm like, "Okay, so be it." And we were really excited that look at how efficient our go-to-market model is. It's very efficient. And what we found, though, is that as you grow in strategic importance to those customers, it behooves not just the customer, but the company, us, the vendor, to build a relationship that goes beyond the developer. Because what happens is, it happens slowly, and it's not something the developer may not know is going to happen, or we may not know is going to happen, but suddenly the decision maker might change as the check sizes start getting bigger. Or you may see that there's other opportunities to go in and serve that company with even more, with new and other interesting solutions. And so what we really started to do is to start working our way through the org chart of companies to build a more mature relationship with our customers over time. And so that leverages the developer first approach, but it's not a developer only approach. And so I think when you sort of go in, have the developer open the door for you, but you got to walk in the door if you want to maintain a great relationship as you're becoming more strategically important to that company. And if you want to be able to cross-sell and upsell over time for other solution areas. And so that's what we've done by scaling our go-to-market team. And it's worked very well. And by the way, our go-to-market efficiency has stayed right about where it is, where it was at the time of the IPO. And we've grown our go-to-market team tremendously in the recent years, but our efficiency has stayed basically right where it was at the time of our IPO and is already best in industry. In Q4, I think we spent 23% of our revenue on sales and marketing. And wow. In our industry, and we grew over 50% year over year at a $2 billion run rate. And most companies that are growing honestly more slowly than Twilio, sometimes they spend 50, 70% of revenue on sales and marketing. So this developer first approach, by empowering developers, letting them open the door and bring us into companies and be our biggest advocates inside of companies, really pays off, not just for them because they get to get started on their own time frame, very little risk to start working with Twilio, but for Twilio, it means we have a really efficient go-to-market machine, despite the fact that we have grown our sales presence tremendously in the recent years.
I love that nuanced perspective on developer first, not developer only, which I think a lot of people do miss these days. So, yeah, I mean, an amazing stats as you continue to scale. So I've hogged a lot of your time. I'm going to look over to the chat now to make sure we get some audience Q&A in. And this is actually a great segue off this last question, which is Gabriel Kaplan asks, how do you engage with developers at the mega enterprise when the key decision makers are non-developers?
You know, the interesting thing I would say is that we've got sales reps who've been in the industry for a long time, and they'll tell stories about yesteryear of whatever they were selling 10 years ago. They'll say, it used to be I'd go in and I'd sell to the line of business decision maker, and I would show my slides, and the business decision maker would be really excited, and they turn to the IT people who are in the room and say, hey, can we do this? Is what he's saying true? And they'd stand there and like, no, not possible, right? And like the big obstacle to overcome was like getting the IT people to begrudgingly go along with implementing the thing. And the difference at Twilio is the developers in the room are actually our biggest advocates. The line of business owners say, is it really possible that we can do this stuff? And the developers are there saying, not only is it possible, we've actually already built it. Here's the prototype, check it out. Right. And so developers become, again, so they open the door. Now, inside of a larger enterprise, it's less likely that they're able to single-handedly sign the deal or deploy it without having a deal in place, like using just the terms of service on the website kind of thing. But that's okay, because the developers bring you in, they're the champions. And let's say you're an executive at a company. What do you want to do? You want to trust the salesperson in a slide deck from that company? Or do you want to trust your own developers who say, not only is it possible, we already built the thing, that's the lower risk path to any project's success. And so having the technical advocates and getting out of the way and enabling them to build things on their own, that just really greases the whole process and makes the transactions move more quickly, higher close rates, lower competition in those deals, et cetera. So it really makes for a much smoother relationship and helping that relationship get off the ground than if you don't have the developer motion at all present during the process.
Awesome, thanks. Looking at another question, how do you often translate the top customer problems into the right product? And what do you think are the best things for founders to spend time on in the early stages besides talking to customers?
Well, I like to say that big, hairy, important customer problems, it's like the gold of business. And a lot of people are often very focused on the solutions. They're very in love with their product or their idea or whatever it is. But the most important thing you can do in business is have a really important and hard customer problem that your customers need solved, and an insight into that problem that no one else has seen. Notice I said not like an insight into the solution. It's really the insight into the problem that the market has not yet figured out. Like we saw this. We're very fortunate in that we have a platform. So if you think about it, developers come and build on our platform. And by the very nature of the fact that they're taking their time and their money to go build on Twilio, it signals to us some unsolved problem in their business, right? Because if it was a solved problem, if they had, bought some piece of software and installed it and it just ran and did its thing and solved the problem, then nobody would be building on Twilio. So every time a developer picks up their tools and builds on Twilio, it's signal about some big unsolved problem. And when we see a bunch of enterprises all having to go build this exact same thing, you're like, that signal that there's something wrong with some market somewhere, like some other solution has never arose to solve that problem. And we like to go learn why. And this happened in the contact center market, where we saw really big companies like Home Depot and ING Bank. They were building their own contact centers on top of Twilio's APIs. And I remember, several years ago, I went to ING and I said, first of all, thank you for your business. We're really excited to be working with you. But why are you building your own contact center from scratch on top of Twilio? And, a contact center is how they handle support requests that come in via voice or chat or messaging or even video. And they said, well, look, here's the problem, right? There's all these like old legacy, crufty on-prem contact centers, and they don't scale, and they don't, all of them all do one channel. So when we want to do chat, we got to bring in another one. We literally, our contact center is 17 vendors cobbled together. And what we really want to do is move this whole thing to the cloud and make it flexible enough that it can serve all the different business units we have and all the countries we work in. So, and they said, so no one has built that thing. We went and talked to other customers and we said, is this, are you seeing this problem where you've got this like choice between like crufty old on-prem stuff and like cloud stuff that's not flexible enough? It's like kind of just a turnkey solution. And a lot of customers said, yeah, that is a big problem. And we just sort of assumed that's the way it has to be. And that gave us the idea to then build a platform for the contact center. And that's our Flex product that's enabling companies, all of Shopify runs on Flex, all of Lyft runs on Flex. And we've got, banks, Allianz in the insurance industry, everything from your digital disruptors to your Fortune 500s. Actually, I loved it in Q3. We were able to announce in our earnings call that both a Fortune 50 bank and Robinhood have both adopted Flex for their contact center.
There you go.
And it was like, you're winning when you've got the digital disruptor and the incumbent in any industry, both, realizing they have to go build, and the contact center is a place where they have to differentiate, and they can't just like get a turnkey, legacy vendor up and running. And so, that was an insight that came from being able to see our customers' activity, ask the right questions, and realize that there was a structural problem in a very large market. And so those are the kinds of things, when I say you're looking for big customer problems, those are the types of insights that, like, when customers use your product in ways you didn't imagine, you can just say thank you, or you can go ask a lot of good questions. And I think that's really the kind of company that at least I strive to create at Twilio.
Excellent. Here's another one. How do you figure out which use cases to focus on when your product or tech is quite horizontal and can solve a lot of things? How do you approach developers to allow them to build their own stuff on top of it?
Well, I mean, that is the promise of infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
There's a quote at the end of every press release for every product we've ever launched. I have a quote that says, "We can't wait to see what you build." And it was like an Easter egg for a while until I started letting everybody know that that was actually in every press release. But it's really true, right? In that, like, we want to build infrastructure that enables the maximum number of use cases. And it's a little counterintuitive because a lot of times, say product managers or other folks that you hire, they've learned through their careers that you need to like focus on a use case or an industry or a vertical. And like, that's how you build products. And infrastructure just works fundamentally differently in that you want to enable the maximum number of use cases and industries and customers to use this thing. And the way that one of the ways in which you do that is actually you bring software architects really into product leadership. Because think about it, your products are infrastructural products.
Yep.
And so you need architectural thinking at the table for how you design and build them. So I think that's one of the key observations that I have. Number two is you do need to then do more work to help customers connect the dots between what your infrastructure can do for them. So that it becomes a marketing exercise of sort of connecting those dots. There's a lot of ways to do it. Some companies are like, oh, we've got products and solutions in the top nav of their website. I don't really like that approach. But we tend to do it more with like recipes, like, oh, if you're trying to build, a lead generation app, like here's code that does it, and we can talk about how it works and like what the benefits are and why you might want it. You kind of bridge the infrastructure world into the use case world, and that really helps tactically on the ground with helping buyers understand what you do. Helps with SEO, and it helps with getting customers off the ground more quickly than everyone has to go figure it out themselves.
Awesome. So I think we have time for one last question. I'll pick one here. As you speak with customers today, what is the next big, hairy, important customer problem that they want you to solve beyond SMS, voice, video, contact center, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we talk to customers, they really say, like, look, I've got all this customer engagement from Twilio. I can use Twilio across all the channels that my customers want. But the really hard thing here is actually knowing what to communicate and when and what to say to my customers in order to make it a great experience, because I have all of these disparate systems that I've bought or built through the years to engage with my customers across one or more of the touch points. And you think about every customer journey in every company is it starts with your marketing and your sales. That's when you meet the customer and you want to win their business. You win their business. Then you've got your in-product experience of how do they interact with your product itself. And oftentimes there's customer touch points in there. Then there's the oh, I need service and support, kind of the after the fact. And ultimately, and then it kind of loops back on itself with more marketing and more sales to create, this cycle that really is, how do I win customers? How do I delight customers? And how do I make them loyal, repeat customers? And the challenge that every company that I've talked to faces is the understanding of my customer, who they are and how I can better serve them. That's a data question. And that data is trapped in all these different systems. I've got a marketing automation system, a sales automation system. I've got the users table that the developers built. I've got the support system, and the data is everywhere. And as much as I try to integrate it actually, the problem proliferates faster than I can solve it. And so if you could help me, Twilio, to bring all that data together and form one picture of my customer, and then use that picture of my customer to be better at having a holistic engagement strategy across all those touch points. So that when you come to the website and you shop for men's shirts, my marketing can actually not send you marketing emails the next day for women's hats, just really things like that, right? That are even great companies are struggling to do that well. And so that's why we acquired Segment last year. It's because they solved that data problem. And now bringing Segment together with Twilio, our vision here is to create one platform that enables companies to engage with their customer across every one of those touch points in a way that is meaningful, that is relevant, and ultimately helps to acquire, retain, and grow customers better than ever before.
Awesome. Well, that is an incredible note to end on. Jeff, I can't thank you enough. If you look in the chat, you'll see just tons of thank yous in there. This was great insight. And I'll turn it over to Kira to close us out.
Thank you, John. It's been great to be here. Thanks, everybody.